The junkyard on Epsilon Tertius stretched to the horizon like a graveyard made of steel. Broken poles, cracked engine ribs, and dead thruster shells stuck out of the red-brown sand like the bones of giant animals. Heat poured down from the twin suns and turned every piece of metal into a trap that could burn skin in seconds. Jake Mercer moved through it anyway. He was 10 years old, small for his age, but fast and careful. He knew this salvage field better than he knew the cramped sleeping corner he shared with his father on their old cargo hauler. His father said the junkyard was dangerous, but it was also their only steady chance at survival. If they found the right parts, they could trade them at the outpost for food credits. If they didn't, they ate cheap protein bars that tasted like dust and disappointment. Jake's salvage bag clinked as he walked. Inside were 3 power couplings that still worked, a navigation chip with only one cracked edge, and a metal badge that might have once belonged to a ship captain. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to keep them going a little longer. Then Jake saw something that had not been there before. A crater cut into the sand, wide and fresh. The glassy shine around its rim showed the sand had been melted by extreme heat. Jake stopped and stared. He had searched this area just 2 weeks ago. There hadn't been any crater then. In the center sat an escape pod. It was small, about 3 meters long, but it looked wrong in a way Jake couldn't explain. Dust covered it, and impact marks scratched its surface, yet strange flowing symbols still shimmered faintly beneath the grime. They didn't look like any human language Jake had ever seen. Unknown meant dangerous. His father had taught him that. But his father had also taught him that valuable salvage never stayed unclaimed for long. Jake approached slowly, listening for warnings. A radiation leak might hiss. An unstable core might tick. A damaged battery might whine. But the pod was silent. It seemed almost calm, like a sleeping animal. He searched for an access panel. Minutes passed as his fingers traced seams that didn't feel mechanical. Then something clicked under his touch. The hatch didn't open like a door. It unfolded. Panels slid back in a smooth pattern that felt more like a living thing stretching than a machine moving. Jake leaned closer and froze. Inside the pod was a girl. She was curled up in a tight space, small and thin, and she looked about his age. For a second Jake thought she might be dead. Then her eyes opened. They were dark but not empty. Tiny flecks moved inside them like distant stars. She stared at him, confused and afraid. She made a sound, half a gasp, half a word in a language that made Jake's head hurt when he tried to understand it. Then she started to cry. Quiet tears rolled down her dusty cheeks, carving clean lines through the dirt on her face. Jake did what most 10-year-olds would do in a situation like that. He panicked. Then he tried to fix it. He pulled out his water flask. His father had told him never to share it. Water cost money, and strangers brought trouble. But the girl looked so lost that the rules felt smaller than her fear. Jake held the flask out. She stared at it like it might explode. Then she looked at him. Then back at the flask. Slowly she reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed his for a moment, warm, real, alive. She drank carefully, watching him the whole time. When she gave it back, she tried to smile. It was crooked and unsure, but it was something. Jake sat in the sand outside the pod, suddenly aware that he had no plan. He couldn't take her to his father. His father would ask questions Jake couldn't answer, and station authorities would get involved. But Jake also couldn't leave her there. Nights on Epsilon Tertius were freezing. A person could die before morning. So Jake came back the next day with half his breakfast ration. And the next day. And the next. At first they spoke only with gestures. The girl pointed at herself and made a sound Jake couldn't copy. Jake tried anyway, but his tongue couldn't form it. So he called her Ree, because it was close enough, and she didn't seem angry. Ree learned human words fast, too fast. It was like her brain was built for languages. Within a week, they could trade simple sentences. Within 2 weeks, they were talking for real, though her accent made human speech sound like music. Ree drew pictures in the sand to show Jake where she came from. She sketched floating cities in space. She drew ships as big as mountains. She drew crowds of people with the same long, pointed ears she had. When she drew her family, tall figures in rich clothing, Her face grew sad and far away. Jake tried to distract her with stories. He told her about the salvage field and its dangers, about the time he woke up a cleaning drone by accident and it chased him for an hour, about the outpost pilot who cursed in 6 languages when his ship refused to start. Ree laughed. It was a bright sound, clean and clear, like a bell. 3 weeks after finding her, Jake made a decision. He had been building something in secret, collecting parts during his normal salvage runs. It was a communication booster made from scraps of 12 different ships. It was unsafe, messy, and powered by a battery that should have only been used for emergency lights. But Jake had learned how to make broken things work. He installed it in Ree's pod and powered it on. The console lit up with colors Jake didn't know existed. Ree stared shocked. Then she pushed past him and her fingers flew across controls with skill Jake didn't have. The pod began broadcasting on frequencies that made Jake's teeth ache. She was calling home. Jake felt a heavy truth drop into his chest. She was leaving. He had gotten used to her. To having someone his age. To talking with someone who didn't smell like engine grease and stress. He didn't want the junkyard to be quiet again. On impulse, Jake pulled out a bent piece of wire, a scrap ring he had planned to trade. Now it felt stupid to trade it for food. He held it out to her, his face burning with embarrassment. "When we grow up," Jake said, words rushing out with the serious honesty only a child could have, "I'll marry you." In Jake's mind it sounded like a hero's promise. Something that meant they would meet again. Ree took the wire like it was precious. She said something in her own language, words like bells mixed with thunder, and hugged him quickly and fiercely before turning back to the console. 3 days later, the ships arrived. They didn't announce themselves like human vessels. They simply appeared, sliding out of hyperspace with a precision that made Jake feel like he was watching magic. Sleek forms, beautiful and terrible, moved as if space itself made room for them. Jake hid behind a pile of debris and watched tall armored figures step onto the sand. Their ears rose in elegant points. Their movements were calm and confident, like fear was something they had never needed. Ree ran to them. They checked her for injuries with humming devices. One of them knelt to her level. Ree spoke fast and pointed toward where Jake was hiding. Jake's heart hammered. He expected them to come for him. But after a moment, the armored figure nodded. They lifted Ree gently and carried her back toward the ships. Ree looked back once. Her small fist was clenched around the wire ring. Then the ships folded into hyperspace with a sound like thunder rolling backward. The junkyard went silent again. Jake stood alone in the heat and told himself it was fine. Ree was safe. That was what mattered. He would probably never see her again. And life went on. Years passed. The memory faded into a dusty corner of Jake's mind. He grew up the way people on hard worlds grew up, fast, tired, and practical. By 40, he ran a repair bay on Sentinel Station. It wasn't a dream job, but it kept him alive. His assistant was Rusty, a tall old android with a sharp voice and no patience for Jake's low prices. One day, Station Control sent a message. A diplomatic shuttle requested docking. Not only that, they requested Jake Mercer by name. Then Rusty added the detail that made Jake's blood run cold. The vessel is from the Valerian Dominion. Everyone knew the Valerian Dominion, an ancient power far beyond human reach. Contact was rare and usually meant trouble. A shuttle arrived 15 minutes later. It landed in Jake's messy bay like a jewel dropping into a scrapyard. Its door opened like a flower unfolding. 3 Valerians stepped out. Then she stepped out. Wearing clothing that looked like starlight turned into fabric. Long pointed ears. Dark eyes flecked with moving stars. She looked straight at Jake and smiled. "Hello, Jake," she said. "It has been some time." Jake's mind stalled. She raised her hand. In her palm, held inside a clear shimmering field, was a bent ring of wire. The memory slammed into him like a ship hitting a wall. "Oh," Jake whispered. "Oh no." "Oh yes," she replied, smiling wider. "I am Empress Leary of the Valerian Dominion. But you knew me as Ree." Then she took a step closer. "And you promised to marry me," she said. "I have come to collect my husband." Rusty made a sound that was suspiciously close to laughter. Jake could only stare, feeling his entire quiet life tip into something impossible, because once, in a burning junkyard, a 10-year-old boy had tried to stop a frightened girl from crying, and the universe had remembered.